Good morning. At least it is for me. I don't know when you're watching it, but it's for me. So this video is going to be what I perceive to be the differences from trying to teach in South Korea and trying to teach in China. So what I perceive to be the biggest difference between trying to get an English teaching job in South Korea. Alright, I'm back. So the biggest difference, I would say, one of the biggest differences would be flexibility. There's a lot more flexibility for people who are trying to go teach English in South Korea versus, and for people trying to teach English in China than there is for South Korea. What I mean by that is options. There are more options for teaching in China. There's also more, a very wider variation in salaries, a wider variation in student sizes, a wider variation in what level you're teaching, wider variation in ability. Like, it's a lot more flexible, and there's a bigger flexibility for the requirements or preferences for hiring teachers for China versus South Korea. To me, South Korea has a very structured and set way that they hire, very structured and set salary. Like, you're most likely going to be making this much every month, no matter what level you're teaching, and you're most likely going to be teaching one of these areas versus all these other areas. There's also more flexibility as far as once you get to China, you have more options to start doing something else. To me, it's a lot harder to try to do something other than English teaching as a foreign teacher, as a foreigner in South Korea. Whereas in China, they have more opportunities to teach other languages. They have more opportunities. Like, I taught PE once. You can teach dances. You can also become something outside of teaching. I know people who started their own businesses there. I know people who became chefs. Well, not people. I know a person who became a chef there. You have more opportunity as a foreigner in China in general, in my opinion. And so overall, it's more flexible. Vacation time is also different. Seems to be different for South Korea versus China. In South Korea, the vacation time seems to be basically the same for everybody, and you're going to have to desk warm in South Korea during your vacation time. In China, I've never even heard of desk warming before I started looking at videos for South Korea. But I didn't hear about anybody that I was working with having to do desk warming as far as during vacation time. I could see it during the school year when there's classes, and then you still have office hours. But when it's vacation time for the students, it's vacation time for you. It's kind of up to you whether or not you're going to be involved with an English camp or a summer camp, or it's already in your contract. But if you're not teaching summer camp or winter camp, you're not having to still be in the office when there are no students there. The size of South Korea and the size of China. South Korea is about the size of maybe one or two provinces in China, versus China is about the size of the United States. So that comes back to flexibility. There are a lot more locations that you can go teach. There are a lot more places you can go visit in China. There are a lot more languages. There's a bigger diversity of food, a bigger diversity of Chinese people. And so, which kind of leads me into that. Diversity is another big difference between South Korea and China. Like I said, there's a big, China has subcultures. South Korea has subcultures, but not as many. Maybe I would say there are maybe 2 or 3 at the most. Strong subcultures still going on in South Korea, but in China there are many, very many subcultures with dialects and separate languages and customs and even laws. It seems like China's size leads into its diversity. There are also more foreigners in China, and more variation of foods, more variation of those foreign cultures not infiltrating, but being present in China. You'll find a lot more areas that have food that is not strictly Chinese, and the Chinese food by itself is pretty diverse. You have a lot of variations and options when it comes to Chinese food. I had one more for the difference that the size makes, which is that South Korea was able to modernize a lot faster than China was, and so overall living conditions are going to vary a lot more in China than they will in South Korea. And South Korea in general seems to be a lot more clean than does China. A similarity would be you're still going to have to squat to pee. To me, there seems to be a general difference in the way education is structured in South Korea versus in China. In South Korea, to me, it is more structured. Versus in China, I guess because it is so big, that seems to play into a lot of things, but because China is so big, they tend to have a lot more variation in the way they structure education in schools. As well as I know people who were from South Korea that came to, in South Korea University, who came to China, transferred to China for a semester to take a break. So they were still students, but they were coming to China to take a break. And so to me, school in general in China is just not as difficult, university level. Now where the similarity comes in with their education is K through high school. K through 12 in China and Korea are similar. However, to me, China's is a little bit more strict earlier than South Korea. Another big difference would be the international access. There's a big difference in having international reach and being able to contact your family back home from China versus from South Korea, because so many things are blocked in China. So you need a VPN in China. Like if you're going to try to have Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and stuff like that in China, you're going to need a VPN. I didn't have a VPN because the only thing that I really missed was YouTube, and it was just too much work for me to try to get a VPN without a foreign card or account. So a similarity between the two would be their perception of foreigners and their perception of foreign teachers. They're both very kind of logical in their approach to foreigners and their perceptions of foreigners. Indian people come from India. Black people come from Africa. Asian people come from Asia. White people come from Europe. And so if you're not white, they don't expect you to speak English. And definitely not expecting you to be able to teach English. But in both locations, this is being combated with the fact that there are more foreigners coming in and the diversity of the foreigners coming in. So coming back to language, there is a slight similarity between South Korean language and Chinese language, but there are also differences. So I'm talking about the similarities first, which is that much like Japanese language, Korean language pulled from Chinese language. And so if you learn Chinese, Japanese and Korean should become a lot easier. From my perspective, when I started trying to learn Korean, now going to the differences, Korean is easier in the sense of becoming literate. But that's it. Because there are so many, because again, South Korea is so much more strict. Not strict, but structured. And so there's a system to their language, more of a strict system to their language, to where you have to address certain people certain ways. And there are so many social rules / norms that go into the language, where I can only address this person from this age group this way, and they can only address me this way, or else it may be seen as taboo or disrespectful. So I would say with the culture, the similarity comes in where they are very welcoming and respect is very important. Doesn't matter if you're in South Korea or China, you will find that to be a big similarity. Differences in the culture would be history, China lost quite a bit of their history. They still have a lot, but they had a period where they were absolutely combating everything that was held dear in their history, versus South Korea never really had that. And then another similarity with the people, to me, in the way that they welcome foreigners. To me, South Korea and China are very welcoming, very helpful to to foreigners. They want to put their best foot forward, because in both countries, saving face is very important. And so they don't want to disrespect or cause foreigners to feel too out of place and such. Well, out of place. They make us feel they make you feel very out of place in both places, because staring is the norm. They will stare at you in China. They will stare you down in South Korea. But yeah, hopefully that gives somebody some kind of information, especially if you're considering between the two. There are so many more I could talk about, but I'm going to stop it there.